Welcome to week 20, everyone. I cannot believe we're already here. All right, so one quick reminder, my friends, it is now week 20. You are so close to the end. You just have a couple of weeks of maybe normal schoolwork and then final exam week, which means that on June 7th, that is a Monday, June 7th, you absolutely have to have any and all missing work in. June 7th is the hard cutoff. On the morning of June 8th, I am going to start grading, and anything that is not submitted on by June 7th, I should say, will not be recorded for your final grade. So please mark June 7th on your calendar and plan to have any and all missing work in by June 7th. All right, I always encourage you to watch the weekly overview videos. And we are finishing the book this week. You are reading chapters 11 through 12. We are finishing the reading of Lord of the Flies. You'll have a little more work to do with it next week, but this is the end of the reading assignments, so congratulations. All right, you have 2 assignments this week. Let's take a look at those. You have a quick write. You guys are the quick write champions. You know exactly what to do here. 5 to 7 sentences. Support your assertion with textual evidence. That means quotes or examples, and make sure it's well edited. Your prompt. Consider the following quote. Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of a man's heart, and the fall through the air of the true wise friend called Piggy. What consequences will Piggy's death have on the boys on the island? Choose either Ralph or Jack and discuss what impact Piggy's death will have on them now that they are rescued. Will they ever be able to be normal again? Are their personalities permanently changed? Is there any chance to make up for what has happened? Write this pick one of these 2 characters here, either Ralph or Jack, and really analyze how Piggy's death is going to affect them here in the moment as they're being rescued, but also after the story ends. You guys see the rubric, you know exactly how to do this. All right, you have a discussion. We're going to go back and talk about Carl Jung's archetypes. In this discussion, choose any one of Carl Jung's archetypes that we have discussed so far. Just choose one of them. That's self, persona, ego, shadow, animus, or anima, and pair it with one of the main characters in Lord of the Flies. Ralph, Jack, Simon, and Piggy are your most obvious choices. Those are the people we know the most about. Discuss how this character demonstrates this archetype, and do they have that archetype in balance, or do they have too much of it, too much ego, too much persona, whatever. So pick an archetype, pick a character, and discuss how that character demonstrates that one archetype. This is going to be in preparation for next week, week 21's assignment, so this is going to be helping. Remember to respond, react, and relate to at least one other post. All right, I have included the Lord of the Flies movie. I think this was the 1980s version of it. I have warned you guys, there aren't any very good versions of Lord of the Flies in the movie universe. I don't know why. You'd think it'd be kind of an easy one to do, but nonetheless, this is entirely optional. There's no assignment or obligation here. This is just in case you want to take a look. If you were curious, obviously you don't have to watch the whole thing. So just take a look if you're curious, ignore it if you're not. Okay, guys, let's talk about chapters 11 and 12. Chapter 11. I can't see no more, and I got to get my glasses back. Awful things has been done on this island. This is Piggy talking. Piggy's in a bad spot. Piggy's eyesight is such that he really cannot function without his glasses, and he's right. Awful things have been happening. They have to get the glasses back, not just because of Piggy's eyesight, but they also don't have the ability to make fire without the glasses, which also means that they can't do anything about signaling for rescue. But apart from that, there's kind of a power play here, as in who's really still in charge on the island. Will Jack listen to Ralph's demand for these glasses back? So there's a few things going on here, but Piggy is kind of in the middle of it, and he's very crippled without this. But they'll be painted. You know how it is, the others nodded. They understood only too well the liberation into savagery that the concealing paint brought. So it's Ralph, Piggy, and Sam and Eric, right? This is what's left of Ralph's control on the island, and they're all terrified. Sam and Eric are terrified, and they're right. Jack's crew is painting themselves. And remember what Philip Zimbardo said about masking. When we put on masks and we conceal our faces, how our capacity for violence and cruel action increases. Ralph, Piggy, Sam, and Eric set off to confront Jack and his group. They are scared, but they are desperate. They have to do this. This isn't something that they can just not do. I say, you voted me for chief. Didn't you hear the conch? So Ralph is still continuing to try to blow the conch, to call the meeting, to try to call order, to try to maybe get everybody back in line. But the Conch and Ralph have lost all authority over Jack and his group. They capture Sam and Eric. They tie them up and torment them. Piggy's hiding where Ralph told him to stay because he can't see and he's going to fall. And Ralph has lost all authority. You're acting like a crowd of kids. So this is Piggy talking. He steps out of hiding to confront Jack and his group of people, right? You're acting like a group of kids, a crowd of kids. Which is better, to be a pack of painted Indians like you are, or to be sensible like Ralph is? Which is better, to have rules and agree, or hunt and kill? Piggy tries one last time to gain control and talk sense to the hunters. He's trying to talk some sense to them. He's trying to get them to see some reason. Ralph heard the great rock before he saw it. He was aware of a jolt in the earth that came to him through the soles of his feet. The rock struck Piggy a glancing blow from chin to knee. The conch exploded in 1,000 white fragments and ceased to exist. Piggy, saying nothing, with no time for even a grunt, traveled through the air sideways from the rock, turning over as he went. Remember when they foreshadowed this a few chapters back, how there was a bridge-type formation here in this rock outcropping that they said, oh, we can roll rocks down it to take out our enemies. This is exactly what they've done, and they've killed Piggy. They destroyed the conch, it's turned into powder, right, upon the blow, and Piggy has been killed. He has been thrown from that bridge and hit with this rock. The hunters roll a rock down the bridge at Piggy, killing him and destroying the last vestiges of control on the island. Ralph is hit with a spear and injured, and Sam and Eric are still captives. So Ralph is injured, Sam and Eric are captives, and Piggy's dead. As we go into chapter 12, Ralph hides in the woods. He's wounded, and he is hunted by Jack's group. At length he came to a clearing in the forest where rock prevented vegetation from growing. Now it was a pool of shadows, and Ralph nearly flung himself behind a tree when he saw something standing in the center, but he saw the white face was bone and the pig's skull grinned at him from the top of the stick. This is that same pig's head on a stick that drove Simon insane a few chapters back, but now it has obviously deteriorated somewhat, and it's having a somewhat similar effect on Ralph. He's looking at it as though he's giving it, for a literary term here, he's personifying it. He's giving it qualities like it can communicate with him. He's not quite so far gone as maybe Simon was, hearing voices, but he's definitely seeing something in this horrible thing, this pig's head on a stick, that is making him feel like it's communicating with him. The skull regarded Ralph like one who knows all the answers and won't tell. Sam and Eric were savages like the rest. Piggy was dead, and the conch smashed to powder. Sam and Eric are kind of forced into joining Jack's team. I mean, it's that or they get killed, and so they do. But you can tell they're not really in on it. In fact, Sam and Eric warn Ralph he'll be hunted by the group and he better hide. They warn him. They're not really that loyal to Jack, but they also have to look out for their own salvation here because they really will be hurt or maybe even killed by Jack and the group if they don't at least pretend to be aligned with them. But they do warn Ralph. The seconds lengthened. Ralph was looking straight into the savage's eyes. Don't scream, you'll get back. Now he's seen you. So Ralph is hunted and injured, and just when he thinks all is lost. A naval officer stood on the sand looking down at Ralph in wary astonishment. Fun and games, said the officer. Who's boss here? I am, said Ralph loudly. A little boy who wore the remains of an extraordinary black cap on his red hair, and who carried the remains of a pair of spectacles at his waist, started forward, then changed his mind and stood still. I find this so interesting in a couple of different ways. For one thing, Jack and his crew have lost their names. Remember, they were just calling Jack the chief for a while, and now they are just the savages. Ralph was looking straight into the savage's eyes. So this is that part of that dehumanization process that, remember, Philip Zimbardo said greases the wheels of evil, right? And then this naval officer shows up. They're rescued. How he found them is kind of a miracle, right? But he did. And he sees all these boys. From his perspective, he sees all these incredibly filthy, torn up, ratty little boys come rolling out of the forest. He doesn't know any of the backstory or context for what's going on. Fun and games, he said. I cannot even imagine how I would blow up if I had been through what these boys had been through, and then somebody said fun and games. Woe betide the person who said that to me. Uh, but and then ultimately, when he says who's boss and Ralph says I am, Jack does not step forward. Jack, who has fought tooth and nail to have control, to want to be the one in charge, he doesn't say a word here. What is this about, right? He doesn't actually want to accept responsibility. We are seeing who actually has the powers of leadership and the ability to accept responsibility, good and bad, for what's going on the island. And it's not Jack. Ralph wept for the innocence, the darkness of a man's heart, and the darkness of a man's heart, and the fall through the air of a true wise friend called Piggy. Ralph breaks down. He absolutely just crashes, as you can imagine. The officer, surrounded by all these noises, was moved and a little embarrassed. He's embarrassed. He even has a line, I didn't put it in this presentation, but it's something about how I would have thought you boys, being British boys, would have kept it all together more. I mean, he doesn't know the context for what they've been through, granted, but at the same time, there's a shocking lack of maybe empathy or compassion on part of the officer. He's embarrassed that Ralph is crying here. So the boys are rescued at the end of this, and it's just that's the end of the story. We don't know anymore. Will they ever really be free of the island? Like, how would you bounce back from something like this? How would you do it? Can you ever really let this go? They killed 2 people, maybe 3, probably 3, right? Because remember the little one who got caught in the fire, nobody ever saw him again at the beginning of the story. They killed Simon, they murdered him, they rolled a rock and killed Piggy, and it's hard to find somebody on the island who's not at least complicit in all 3 of these murders and all 3 of these deaths, besides the fact of what they've gone through, the stress, maybe the feelings of hopelessness that they would never get rescued, the physical strain that they're all under. How are they ever going to actually recover, and who will they be at the end of this? They arrived on this island as one person, but they are going to leave it as very different people. So, who are they now that they've gone through this experience? All right, let's talk about a few of the things that we talked about throughout this book. Let's talk about Philip Zimbardo, first of all. He said that there are 7 steps, the 7 social processes that grease the wheels of evil, 7 things that people do that make it so evil can actually happen in the world. He said there's mindless first steps, diffusion of responsibility, dehumanization of others, de-individuation, uncritical conformity to group norms, passive tolerance of evil, blind obedience to authority. So there's so many examples, but what I'd like you to do is think about the whole book and think about how many times these examples of any of these 7 processes pop up. When do you start seeing them? I put a few of them up here on the screen. No one questions Piggy being called Piggy. This is chapter 1. We start off with the idea of de-individuation and maybe dehumanization of others. They'd never ask his name. They never give him an opportunity to give his name, and they never want to know his name. He isn't a true person to them, right? He's always just Piggy. The conch is a symbol of power and is destroyed in the chaos. So the conch is a symbol of power. So you have this blind authority. This would go under a couple of different things, but the blind obedience to authority. And now you could say that, well, when they're following Ralph, they're okay, but are they? Because it's still blind obedience. They still are expected to just follow Ralph. Now, just because Ralph is maybe has better character than Jack does, doesn't necessarily mean it's right. right? No one should ever blindly follow any leader, no matter how good you think they might be. And the conch is a symbol of that power, and when it gets destroyed, it's really a symbol of that chaos overtaking them. The choir never questions Jack, which helps others to start blindly following him. So again, you have that blind obedience to authority. In this case, it's more of a bad sort, right? To follow Ralph is one thing because we trust him and he has judgment, but the choir never questions Jack. He's been their leader from the start, and they blindly follow him, and they do anything, right? This is also kind of a dehumanization element too, because we never learn any of the choir members' names. They're never differentiated as individuals. We never learn their stories. They are a group. They are a one single unit. No one tries to stop Piggy's murder. In fact, they help, right? Nobody tries to help Piggy. Nobody tries to. We don't have any indication that anyone was trying to stop whoever was. Somebody was responsible for the actual push of the rock that killed him, but there's no indication that anyone tried to stop that, right? You could call this uncritical conformity to group norms. You could call this diffusion of responsibility. You could call this passive tolerance of evil. The hunters paint their faces, hiding their identities. Philip Zimbardo talks about this a lot, right? About the idea of dehumanization, de-individuation, masking. He talks a lot about how when historically people have masked their faces, their capacity for brutality went up considerably. Refusal to take responsibility when the little one disappears in the fire or when Simon is killed. Yet diffusion of responsibility and the passive tolerance of evil, mindless first steps. There's really a lot going on with this example too. No one even talks about the little guy that disappeared. Right? He's just disappeared. They don't know him. They didn't know his name, and so they forget him fast. No one wants to take responsibility for Simon either. In fact, they victim blame Simon and they say, well, he should have known better. Right? Why would you go into a dangerous situation? All right, let's talk about Carl Jung a little bit here too. So we talked about the archetypes that Carl Jung believed exist in all people and our psychological makeups. He believed every single person on the planet had all of these different archetypes, these 6 different archetypes in them, right? And the idea was that if you could keep them in balance, then you were going to be healthy, mentally healthy. But if one was overpowering the others or if something was out of balance, then that was where you had mental illnesses, disturbances, anxieties, this kind of thing. So self, persona, ego, shadow, animus, and anima. And here's just a few different ways. I want you to think about all of the different ways, and this is really going to bleed into next week's project, your very last homework assignment for the year. But I want you to really think about next week about how any characters are really portraying any of these qualities, these archetypes. So here's some examples I just put up here on the screen. Jack has a strong front as a leader of the choir, but never shows any vulnerability, right? He has a very strong persona and maybe ego, but he never shows vulnerability. So perhaps that persona and that ego is so overblown that his self is disappearing, right? He doesn't really have a moral compass left. Ralph is genuine at times, but is used to being seen as a leader. Again, now Ralph might be a nicer guy than Jack, but he still has a very strong persona and a very thick ego that he's dealing with because he is used to being seen as a leader. He's always been the guy that people look to lead things, and that is not even a question for him. Of course, he'd be elected leader. And it also reads into the idea of how baffled he is when people stop following his leadership. Well, the struggle for leadership continues throughout the story, often in very violent ways. This really kind of goes with the shadow, doesn't it? I mean, our instinct for violence and ill action, mistreating others. Carl Jung would say that that is directly related to the shadow and our more instinctual base behavior. The naval officers are embarrassed by Ralph's show of emotions. This is so interesting to me that this is their reaction, that they are embarrassed that Ralph is crying. They're kind of embarrassed that the boys look so beat up, right? And talking about animus and anima, and I mean, I remember we talked about look at those with a grain of salt for gender roles, but the idea that you have more vulnerable traits that they would have said are more feminine, and that men are supposed to be more steadfast and more emotionally closed off. To have Ralph behaving in an extremely emotionally vulnerable way is making these naval officers uncomfortable, right? Piggy tries to get the others to listen, but ultimately is often ignored. Now, I'm not victim blaming Piggy on this at all, but Piggy is not accustomed to, he doesn't have that persona of a leader, of a ruler like Jack and Ralph have. His ego is pretty small. He never insists. He could have said in the beginning, you could have said, "My name is not Piggy, it is Joe," or whatever his name is. We never know his name, right? "Don't call me Piggy." He could have started off on the island when Ralph says, "What's your name?" He could have never said, "Well, they used to call me Piggy." I wouldn't have said that, right? Whew, talk about a time when you can leave that nickname behind. But there's something about his ego that is accustomed to maybe being bullied or being belittled by others. Maybe he doesn't really believe that he deserves to be treated well by others. Maybe he started to adopt this identity that's been placed on him by the other boys. So his ego or his sense of self-worth is low, and that is undeniable. I think it grows in strength as the book moves on. Piggy realizes that he is wise, he is smart, he has logic, he has reason, and he has things the other boys don't have, and he really does step up, and I see that persona and that ego grow in a genuine way because they're coming from his self. I see them grow to him trying to get control. He's doing something extraordinarily brave in those moments before his death. He is extraordinarily brave because he is standing up to all of these people and still trying to talk reason into them. All right, the last one on this page says the urge to hunt turns to bloodlust and the killings of pigs become more and more savage. This cannot be ignored because there is a difference between hunting something because you're starving and you need to eat and hunting something because bloodlust. And this is part of the shadow. And I would also say maybe a little bit of persona because Jack really wants to build this image of himself as a fearless leader, right? But the killings of the pigs just get nastier and more horrible. It's not just killing them because we have to eat. They don't actually need to kill the pigs to eat, do they? They have been catching crabs. They can catch fish. They do have fruit. They have food on this island that's not pigs, but they're insisting they need it, and not just killing the pigs, but slaughtering them, right? Doing really gross things with the bodies, like putting the heads on sticks. So we're dipping into the shadow and some of these real base urges and base behaviors. All right, so that's what all the only examples I gave you. But next week, you're going to be doing a little assignment with Carl Jung and these archetypes and the book. So bear in mind how all of the characters are exhibiting different elements of the archetypes. All right, that's all I got for you. Don't go away. We'll go back over to the PowerPoint, and please put any and all questions up there in the chat. Thanks all. I'll talk to you in a minute.